Hello, welcome into another edition of the All Things Bama podcast powered by BamaCentral.com. I'm your host, Tyler Martin, and joined with me is the one and only Tony Tsoukalas, who covers everything Alabama related at BamaCentral.com. Tony, hope you're doing well, man. And spring football is amping up here in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, definitely. It's an exciting time because football runs everything. I know there's a lot of sports going on, but it's always really, exciting when we get to talk about football again and we're able to. Don't get to see practices this spring like in other springs, but I'm pretty excited to be talking about football again.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I do want to mention softball, baseball as well, and both of them are really in the meat of their schedules. Alabama, unfortunately, took a loss in the midweek to UAB for baseball in Birmingham. Meanwhile, softball was able to beat UAB. And then, I was hoping we'd be sitting here talking about an Alabama Sweet 16 matchup or Elite 8 matchup coming up. I really hope we would have been talking about that, Tony. But as we saw last weekend in San Diego, that just wasn't going to be the case.
No, definitely. I think there's a lot of people that were hoping for that. It wasn't too long ago that we were talking about like how Alabama was going to certainly get the 20 wins for the second straight year. And that didn't even happen. So it was a rough ending for them. It's probably a lot of people are excited about the beginning of spring camp just because it's able to turn the page and really kind of switch focuses from the basketball team because it's a little bit more of a distraction because of how bad things ended and just such a sour taste in that program's mouth heading into the offseason.
No, I take the blame for that. I jinxed them. It was before the A&M game. I was like, going into the month of March, they've got a great chance to get 20 wins. And then went 0-4 in the most important month of the basketball calendar, unfortunately. And that roster is shaping up quickly for next year. I mean, guys are moving out. The signees are getting ready to come in the summertime. Alex Chiku, obviously in the transfer portal, Keon Ambrose Hilton, and we kind of expect more movement.
Yeah, you would expect there to be, definitely some more movement. I'm thinking now what they're at the 13. If with losing those two, they'd be at the 13. I think if I'm doing the math right, you got to think that I think Jaden Shackelford and JD Davison are both leaving. Javon Quinterly was part of that already left. So so that's at least two more transfers. If those two guys leave, like you could add into the program. So it's going to be a busy offseason. I expect both those guys to leave, but I expect Alabama to replace them. And Alabama will be a player in the transfer portal. They always kind of are. A lot of people like Nate Oates' system. I know things didn't end well, but they're going to have a lot of talent on that roster. They're bringing in, guys like Brandon Miller, who's going to be probably a lottery pick, a one and done kind of guy. You have people returning. You're going to have Namari Burnett. So it's going to be a fun team next year. And it'll be interesting to see the complementary pieces they add once everything kind of shifts together and we see who's leaving and who's coming in. But I'm expecting it to be one of the most talented rosters Alabama has had maybe in a long time.
Yeah, and we obviously said that going into this past year as well, and the talent was there, just the inexperience, right, kind of doomed them, especially when Javon Quinterly went down in the first 3 minutes of that game against Notre Dame. You get back arguably who was probably going to be the best shooter on this team in Namari Burnett. I'm glad you mentioned him. Alabama's already doing a lot of work trying to get, some of these guys in the transfer portal from maybe some mid-majors, right? Nate Oates loves those guys, right? Because a lot of those guys just do the right things, right? And I think they're going to value toughness, effort, defense. They're going to value those things in the transfer portal. And I know a lot of Alabama fans are looking at, some of these SEC transfers, right? Like a Kobe Brown potentially from Missouri. There was a lot of shakeup in this offseason already with the conferences and the coaches. And especially inside the SEC. So I'm interested to see if they can pull any of those intra-conference transfers. Kobe Brown's a guy who I think would really flourish in the system, a guy who Alabama needs, right? You could pair him alongside Charles Bediako. And then, we kind of saw it in the game against Notre Dame, right? When Charles was off the floor and Rojas was also hurt. Like Alabama just didn't have that length, didn't have that athleticism. And that's a guy, that's especially what Kobe Brown can bring you.
Yeah, definitely. Keep an eye out a point guard out of Ohio, Mark Sears. He is a Muscle Shoals native. somebody like Alabama's going to need a veteran point guard. I know that they're going to have, young guys stepping into that position, but I think you need some kind of a veteran, especially if you're losing Quinterly and Shackelford and JD Davis. And so Mark Sears is another guy that I would definitely look for in the transfer portal, somebody that could, you talked about the mid majors, Ohio, I think he fits into Nate Oates' system, and being an Alabama kid, it probably has a decent shot if they were to pursue him. So that's one to keep an eye on. Kobe Brown's another Alabama kid. He would be kind of in that like Juwan Gary mold, right? Like in terms of kind of adding that a little bit of scrap. And Alabama fans don't need to any introduction on him because he has killed Alabama in some recent games. So if anything, getting him, away from Missouri and not having to face him would be a plus for Alabama. But he's somebody too that could add some post presence that they need. But those two would definitely be targets. And there's bound to be some other guys that kind of pop up in the future, whether it's in conference or some of these mid-major guys. A lot of the mid-major guys we don't necessarily know about, but like a lot of those names, those can be like the real big players and the real kind of hidden gems. So, just look at Noah Gurley, and he kind of came on late. He came from Furman. So like those kind of players, I think could be big for Alabama next year.
Noah Gurley will be back too. So, and then that's just another boost that Alabama's going to get some experience, right? And hopefully, the team kind of just meshes more than what it did this past year to go for a third straight NCAA tournament appearance. Kind of closing the door on basketball right there, Tony. Let's talk spring football. One of the best things I saw this week was you guys back in-person media availability. I know you guys are really fired up about that. Enough Zoom, right? And I know Bryce said he was happy to see you guys again in person. But how great is it, man, just to really get back to normal? And I know last year, things were in terms of fans, but not really from the media perspective because it was still over Zoom and everything.
Yeah, I mean, really, outside of like the SEC championship game, it's the first time I've ever talked to Bryce Young and Will Anderson in person. You know what I'm saying? We haven't had these, kind of, live press conferences. It's always been through Zoom, and it's not necessarily the huddle ups where we're like all standing around him, like it had been in the past, but it's still more of a natural conversation. So I think you'll get more, I don't know, like natural moments. I thought it was really kind of cool to see Bryce say that he missed us, or, kind of Will Anderson was also happy to see us. I think the players like it too. It's a more organic conversation instead of talking to somebody through a computer. I say that as we are currently talking through a computer, but I think that it's I think everyone likes kind of being face to face and kind of having that communication. So it will lead to better coverage, in my opinion, as well, because I think you're going to get more of an inside look at these players. So it'll be an exciting spring camp, and anything that's, kind of reverting back to normal, I think is going to be accepted by everyone. I think everybody, misses the way things used to be. So it's slowly but surely getting back to that. So, I commend Alabama for keeping everything safe, but it is, whenever you get a chance to go back to how things were, it is a nice treat. So and you definitely take it, you don't take it for advantage because, after dealing with, without having it, you really realize how cool it is to talk to these people in person and to get that kind of access. So definitely enjoy it.
Now, I know a lot of other schools, right, had went back to normal before Alabama did, kind of really early on, about a year or so ago. But Alabama really milked this out, right? And I mean, there's meaning and purpose behind it all, right? Being able to milk out. You can control the narrative. You can milk this thing out of just, hey, we're going to keep everything to ourselves. Because if you remember last year, it was like, all right, everybody can come to practice. And then it was kind of shut off immediately, right? We're just going to send out video. But it's good to get you guys back there in person. Let's talk spring football, man. What do you think so far coming out of this first full week, Tony, has been maybe the big takeaway for you?
I think it's got to be the transfers. Nick Saban's been very vocal about the transfers. And he's only had positive things to say. And when you look at these three guys, I mean, it's three players that I fully expect to be not only starters, but pretty much stars on the team. Jermaine Burton is a guy that, he had 26 receptions and 30 targets last year. And that's crazy numbers. He was underutilized at Georgia. They didn't get him the ball like you would normally get a player of that stature the ball. And so I think we haven't even seen what Jermaine Burton can do on a football field. I think he's going to be a special guy. I'm not sure he's not the same player as Jamison Williams. So it's kind of hard to compare those two, but I think he will make a big time impact. And he's a deep threat guy. I think he averaged like 19 yards per reception for Georgia. So he is a big, play guy. And then you look at Jahmyr Gibbs. Nick Saban talked about him the other day. He's a guy that can do everything. Nick Saban talked about his receiving ability. Pro Football Focus said he was the highest graded receiver last year. So he can be a third down option. He probably be the starting back. I personally, heading into this, I thought, well, Alabama's going to spread the ball out a lot more in the backfield. That being said, Jahmyr Gibbs is good enough that he could maybe command a role similar to what Najee or Brian had. Now, I don't think that's necessarily what Alabama wants to do just because of all the talent they have in the backfield. But if he warrants that, then, he's definitely got the skill set and the ability to be, a 3-down back and to really get the ball a lot. But, Alabama's returning Jason McClellan and Roydell Williams and Trey Sanders, and they're bringing in 2 freshmen. So, I mean, it's a lot of mouths to feed. And then, finally with Eli Ricks, I expect him to be kind of the lockdown cornerback next to on the opposite side of Kool-Aid McKinstry. And he's a guy that he's coming off a shoulder surgery kind of last fall. He should be fine. So as he gets stronger from that, if he returns back to the form we saw at LSU, I think he's going to be one of the best cornerbacks in the conference. And, that's just kind of ramping things up on that Alabama defense, which is already going to have the nation's best pass rushing duo in Will Anderson and Dallas Turner. If you add a secondary behind them, quarterbacks are already not going to have a lot of time to throw. If they have guys like Eli Ricks there to pick off the ball, it could get really kind of deadly for opposing teams. So all three of those guys is really what I'm excited about.
You mentioned Bryce, talk about Jahmyr Gibbs and Jermaine Burton and those guys. What about Bryce, though? This is the first time ever Alabama's had a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. He's coming off of a great season. What do you think is realistic expectations for Bryce as he moves into what is his final year at the capstone?
Yeah, it's going to be tough to compare like statistically to last year just because he was so good. And it's always tough to kind of like the year after that Heisman year. I mean, there's a reason why, people don't win it 2 times in a row. It's almost you get compared to your previous self. You're not only competing against competition, you're competing against what you did last year, and everyone's going to judge you to that. As far as expectations, I kind of expect more of the same. He was a very polished quarterback. I think there might be decisions that, he made early on. I think you'll probably see more mature, decisions. He might, I don't think he's just going to suddenly decide to run the ball a lot more like, some fans wanted him to. I think he is what he is in that regard. That's his style of being a quarterback. Outside of like just, the overall maturity that comes with being a quarterback, I expect him to just kind of be what he was last year. And that will certainly be good enough for Alabama. I mean, shoot, he's the Heisman Trophy winner. But I think if he does exactly what he did last year, he'll be probably the number 1 pick overall in the draft next year. So he's such a talented kid. He's probably going to go down in history as the best Alabama quarterback in program history. So there's not much more you can say about him. My expectations are really for Bryce Young to beat Bryce Young, which is pretty special.
Yeah, look at the odds right now. He is the odds-on favorite to repeat as a Heisman Trophy winner at 2-1. C.J. Stroud's there at 4-1. Caleb Williams is obviously a hot name at 9-1. Bijan Robinson, the Texas running back, at 15-1, and then DJ Uiagalelei at 20-1. So Bryce obviously standing out among the rest.
I would be shocked if he won the Heisman. I just don't think he's going to. I don't think you're going to win 2 years in a row, especially now. You look at last year, Alabama's had that running back crisis, so they didn't really have a running game to lean on. It almost, as good as Bryce Young is going to be talent wise, and like I expect him to be a good quarterback, it almost makes sense for Alabama just to run the ball more and kind of give its defense some rest, because the defense could be so good. And like that, they might just lean on their running game and their defense, because that's what this team's built for. And that's not to say that like Bryce Young isn't good enough or he's taking a step back. It just might be like what helps them win games. So from a numbers standpoint, and also from a like I said, he's going to be competing against himself. I just don't see him winning the Heisman, but that's not me knocking Bryce Young or even saying that he's going to take a step down. It's almost impossible to win the Heisman 2 years in a row.
Let's see, only 2 guys have done it before.
Only one guy has done it. Yeah, Archie Griffin is the only person that has done it. Tim Tebow came close. I mean, so some people came close to doing it, but yeah, it's only one.
That's right. I knew Archie, and I was thinking Tebow, but Tebow got very, very close. It seemed like he was almost a finalist every single year, with him taking it home one of those years.
Mark Ingram prevented him from doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's flip over to the defense. You mentioned it a little bit there, how good, how special it could be. Will Anderson kind of told you guys earlier this week what he thought about it, right? A more experienced group, a group that's really just hungry, right?
Yeah, it's going to be a nasty group, and there's not a lot of holes in it. I mean, I think some people have said that the defensive line could be a hole, but even then you're having your 3 starters will be seniors. You know what I'm saying? You got DJ Dale coming in the middle. You've got, Byron Young and Justin Aboigbe. You're losing the pass rushing of, Fidarian Mathis. Maybe you get that from Tim Smith or Damon Payne or somebody like that. That would be the hope for Alabama, is to kind of replicate or find somebody that could provide that same kind of inside pass rush. But other than that, I don't really know what the hole is for Alabama. Maybe inside linebacker next to Henry To'oTo'o. Henry To'oTo'o was kind of like streaky last year. He'd had some really good games and some not so great games. If you take away Christian Harris and you're putting in like a Jalen Moody or maybe a Deontay Lawson, or who knows, maybe even Jahad Campbell, beside Henry To'oTo'o, maybe that's a hole. You're stretching it there. The edge rushing is going to be really good. And I think the secondary with Ricks and Kool-Aid and Jordan Battle and DeMarco Helms and Brian Branch and Malachi Moore, I mean, that's a pretty loaded secondary. So not a lot of holes. Maybe you could say up front, maybe you could say in the middle. Even those, though, I don't think are really big holes.
No, not at all. Not at all. Tony, one thing I'm just interested this offseason to kind of see how things shape up is year 2 of the NIL era, right? I'm kind of interested to see how this continues to shape locker room dynamics, players, what is their earning potential still. And I know Will Anderson is a player, right, who obviously chose not to search for those deals and not to really make those a priority, which I think Saban obviously loves that. Some other players did. And I know Bryce in this offseason, right, BMW, Tuscaloosa, I saw he had a deal with them. Just kind of, are you hearing anything maybe about NIL with some of these Alabama players and how it's affecting them?
I don't think it's been an issue. I mean, look, if it was going to be an issue, with players getting jealous or anything, they would have already gotten jealous of Bryce Young. I think if Alabama was to start losing, or if they had like a really bad season, maybe things would pop up where people would start pointing to that. But it just hasn't really been a problem. I think when you look at like what went wrong for Alabama last year, it wasn't NIL. I don't think, I don't buy that like players weren't as bought in because of NIL. Like that certainly didn't seem like the case at all. So I think really it's just injuries that kind of got to Alabama. Injuries in a really good Georgia team got to Alabama. So I don't think that'll be a problem. I think when you look at NIL and how it could affect Alabama, I think, recruiting, I guess. I mean, like, no one really, there's rumors of who this $8 million player was, but, nobody really knows who that was. But if players are getting $8 million to sign somewhere, it's really hard to compete against that. And that kind of goes again, kind of towards what Nick Saban was saying, is he wants these players to get these kind of deals after they go to college, and not so much contingent on them going to a certain place. And that's kind of a gray area where it does get a little bit fishy, and that's not really in the spirit of what we were trying to do with NIL. But that being said, I think that's really maybe the only way that Alabama would be affected. That even that, Tyler, I mean, like, if that's the way things are going to go, it's not like Alabama is like some poverty school. It doesn't have rich alumni that could just also pay kids millions of dollars. I mean, if Alabama boosters see that they're losing kids for $1 or so, you're going to see Alabama players get the same deals, so it's kind of like, I don't want college football to become the minor leagues. I want these kids to make money, but I don't know, there's an amateurism that is kind of makes this sport what it is. And while I want the players to be compensated and have all their opportunities, that like, you don't want to lose that. And so like when you start, $8 million, Tyler, is more than a lot of these NFL players are making. So that's kind of a weird, dynamic. But outside of that, unless that becomes a concern, I really don't mind NIL. I think it's fine. I think a lot of it gets overblown.
Yeah, me too, 100%. I'm right there on the same line of thinking you are, Tony. And I asked that because it's a good segue into recruiting. I wanted to take some time to talk recruiting. Earlier this week, Tennessee landed 5-star Nico. I'm going to let you pronounce his last name, Tony, because on a couple other podcasts, you did it better than me.
Yeah. So hold on. I need to see it in front of me. Nico Yamalieva. Nico Yamalieva.
See, in Knoxville, he's just going to be Nico, and that's just going to be the easy way to say it. And
the I-A-M makes a yum sound.
Okay.
Like yum, like like, so, yeah.
See, you're a Bama football expert, and you're also a Polynesian expert, and we appreciate you've got a tough last name too. So
yeah, I try to, and I still can't say him, and that Uyungagale or whatever. It's really tough. But as someone that has a difficult last name, I like to say other people with difficult last names name right, because I know what it's like to not have it right. So I always make an effort.
So he goes to Tennessee. Eliholstein, a guy me and you have talked about on the site and on here before, right? Decommits from Texas A&M. We talked about Alabama beginning to kind of put some heat there. He schedules another visit to Alabama, his second of the month. And guess who else has a visit to Alabama soon? Arch Manning, the most talked about recruit in this entire class. So quarterbacks in the 2023 class, an interesting dynamic, right? Because for Alabama, I mean, you've got to make sure you're right. You get that guy, that elite guy at the position after Bryce Young. And you see Nico go to Tennessee, and now it appears, right, the two top targets, Eliholstein and Arch Manning.
Those definitely seem to be the two. And, I think it's really telling that Eliholstein has made 2 visits now. I mean, by the time you're listening to this podcast, he'll probably be, either on his way to Tuscaloosa or in Tuscaloosa. So yeah, the fact that he's made 2 visits to Alabama this month is really telling. It'll be his 3rd overall, I believe, because he visited last summer before committing to Texas A&M. And look, everyone wants to talk about Arch Manning, and for good reason. That guy's really, really good. But Eliholstein's quite the player himself. Over 15 games last season, he led his team to an undefeated record. He threw for 3,228 yards and 30 touchdowns with 6 interceptions. And I think he ran for quite a bit too. I don't have those numbers right in front of me, but I know he's a guy that can run the ball as well as throw it. So he definitely fits in the line of elite quarterbacks that Alabama has been bringing in, kind of like Ty Simpson, kind of in that mold of like those kind of guys. I don't know if he's like quite at the Bryce Young level. To be honest with you, I don't know if Arch Manning's at the Bryce Young level, if we're really being honest. But both of those guys are good, and so is Ty Simpson, and so is Jalen Milroe. So I think Alabama is going to be well stocked if they can land one of those guys to replace Bryce Young, whether it be with a true freshman, which kind of seems like a far step, but then also maybe with Ty Simpson or Jalen Milroe. So it's becoming a quarterback factory. And after this year, there's a good chance Alabama will have 4 starters in the NFL. And that's pretty crazy when there's only 32 teams.
And it's interesting too, because Alabama and this coaching staff and, Bill O'Brien, Nick Saban, like what's got to happen though is they're playing an interesting game because, you already mentioned it, 3 visits in the last calendar year now for Eliholstein. With Arch Manning, it seems like it's Alabama, Georgia, Texas, right? Are those 3 big schools that are chasing him. So you think about it, like Alabama's not going to take 2 quarterbacks of that caliber, right? So, do you put the pressure on Holstein if you don't think you're going to get Arch, or do you go after Arch, with the intent of you don't want to kind of burn a bridge with Eliholstein either?
I think Alabama is going to keep after both of them. And I think, I think everyone was kind of waiting on Arch to be the first one. And I think Nico just said, no, I'll set the tone and I'll be the first one. A lot of people think that, maybe a big NIL deal had to do with that. If you go back to our, previous conversation, but I think now if I'm Eli, I kind of like almost wait on Arch. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think I wouldn't be surprised if Arch Manning was to commit to Texas, that Eliholstein commits to a school right away. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think you're going to see these dominoes start to fall. And so I think that there's some politics that go into it. I don't think anyone wants to be viewed as quarterback B or quarterback 2 on the target list, but Arch Manning is a really sought after recruit, probably one of the most sought after and biggest names we've had in a while. So I think that, Alabama is definitely not going to say no to him. And so maybe, I don't know if they even gonna drag their feet on Eliholstein. I wouldn't call it that. I just think that like there's a domino that's going to happen. I don't think Eliholstein doesn't sound like he's in a rush. So I think Alabama's going to continue to like stay on him and be on his radar because I would assume that Arch Manning's the number 1 target. That's kind of like what it feels like at the moment. So I would assume if they, kind of keep Eliholstein right there. So if they don't get Arch, then they can grab him.
Yeah, Arch expected to be in Tuscaloosa the first weekend of April. April would be busy, man. Recruit visits. You got A-Day. That's going to be a really, really busy time. And right now, I mean, like I said, Texas, Georgia, Alabama seem to really be the 3. I know he's going to visit Ole Miss, LSU, and Florida as well. But Texas, man, it seems like the school. I mean, it looks like it's going to be Steve Sarkisian versus Nick Saban and for his services, and that's going to be an interesting battle for sure.
And both teams have other talented quarterbacks, young quarterbacks on their rosters as well. So I mean, yeah. So, but I don't think that's going to bother an Arch Manning. Just like it's not going to bother Eliholstein either. These are guys that are elite quarterbacks that are going to they're going to bet on themselves wherever they go. Hey, look, it's kind of shifting gears a little bit too. Talk about recruiting and meaningful recruits, Tyler. How about one for this coming season in Tyler Steen, the offensive tackle from Vanderbilt? He'll be here this weekend. It won't be just, you talked about, it's coming to be a busy month. I mean, like you could argue that he's more important, for the current scheme of things than Eliholstein is in terms of this weekend's visitors. Yeah, Tyler Steen is a big name as well. He could be a guy that I fully expect, if he was to come to Alabama, would be plugged into that starting 5, possibly at left tackle, and that could really help fill out Alabama's offensive line, which has been a real big question mark this spring.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up the Vanderbilt transfer there and Tyler Steen. If he does end up going to Alabama, it's kind of like, that battle for left tackle, right? Damian George, J.C. Latham, Javion Cohen, guys who are battling for this position, that would shake some things up and kind of, kick some guys to the curb for the majority of the playing time in 2022. That to me right there is the great thing about the transfer portal, right? Is if you've got question marks at a position, you can say, well, let me just go grab somebody real quick, right? And plug and play. And I think that's a great thing about the transfer portal.
Yeah, I think, and look, the Tyler Steen would give Alabama options. As cool as it sounds, or as much as Alabama fans want to have Tommy Brockermeyer and J.C. Latham, the 2 5-star tackles from last class, come in and just be starters. You don't put 2 starting tackles that have never started a game in their life protecting a Heisman winner. You have to have somebody with some kind of experience. And so I really think that either means having a guy like Damian George, who really struggled at the tackle position at tackle, or moving Javion Cohen, to a tackle position. But then what do you do with the guard position? If you get Tyler Steen, you could plug him in as one of those tackles. And then it's a lot easier to take a chance with one of, JC Latham or Tommy Brockermeyer at the other tackle spot than it is to have two new tackles on either side. So let's say you get Tyler Steen, he plugs in at left tackle. Well, now you have an option. Like maybe if you could just go super experienced and go Javion Cohen at right tackle, and then you have two experienced guys. It also allows you to, keep Cohen at guard. And, you could move George at that point to guard, put Latham at tackle, and then you could even put Ekiyor at center. I'd love to see Emil Ekiyor at center. I'm not totally sold on Seth McLaughlin or Darian Dalcourt. So I like the idea. I mean, if they were to get Tyler Steen, I love this offensive line of Steen, Cohen, Ekiyor, George, who I think is going to be a good guard, but I don't necessarily love him at tackle. And then JC Latham on that right tackle spot. I think that is a really sound offensive line. And, but you need that experience at the tackle position that Tyler Steen gives you.
And that five right there, it would be the most experienced combination. And what makes these great Alabama offensive lines, right? It is a great center. I think that's the key, right? To anchor it all down. But I think experience is the biggest thing. And you see, and that's another thing is like, when Alabama's able to go get these guys in the portal, they're getting experienced players, right? They're not just getting guys who, I tried a one squad for 1 year. No, they're getting experienced players. But on a joking side, Tony, not many times will Alabama be looking to Vanderbilt to kind of fill some needs.
No, not very many. But, I think Tyler Steen was a guy that he comes from St. Thomas Aquinas High School. He comes from a really smart family. His brother's currently playing at Virginia. So part of the reason why he chose Vanderbilt was because of the education. He probably could have went to some quote unquote better schools especially for football. So I mean, it's not like he's just this talentless kid that started for plucky Vanderbilt. I think that he's a talented guy. I mean, he's been a starter since his sophomore year of college. So I think that he's a definite talent. Is he Evan Neal? No, he's not and does he have necessarily as much maybe God-given talent as JC Latham and Tommy Brockermeyer? Still probably no, but it's not just talent. If it was just talent, then JC Latham would have started last year. So I think that experience is key. Back to the center position. Check me if I'm wrong, and I might be forgetting one. There might be 1 year, but all of Alabama's national championship teams, at least the most recent ones, have all had a team captain at center. And I just think that if that's going to happen this year, it's probably going to be Emil Ekiyor. I see him being that guy to take over that role.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking in my head right now. Let's see, Landon Dickerson in 2020.
Bradley Bozeman, Ryan Kelly.
Barrett Jones. Yeah.
I don't know what the first one would that be. William Vallejos, was he a captain?
I'd have to look that up.
He even might have been a captain too. So maybe, you know what I'm saying?
But regardless, a guy who players on the team just, kind of admired, right? Really respected. That's kind of maybe the secret sauce right there for, kind of telling the markings of a Nick Saban championship team. But Tony, let's end with this, man. I'm going to kind of put you on the spot right here. It could be Tyler Steen. Next to commit to Alabama is who?
I probably the two people I actually don't think it'll be Holstein, because I think that the quarterback position is just going to drag a little bit. It really could be Tyler Steen. I think right now, because he wants to make his decision. He said before, I talked to his dad too. We have an article on the site. Kind of wants to make his decision by the end of March. I think this is his last visit that he's going to take unless something pops up. So yeah, I think it could be Tyler Steen, because if things go well and he likes this Alabama visit, I wouldn't be surprised if like on Tuesday we see that, or Monday or Tuesday, you know, when he has some time to kind of think about it, he goes ahead and pulls the trigger. That wouldn't super shock me if things really go well this weekend for him.
Hey, and we've had John Garcia on here before, and he told us the two most important visits, the first and the last.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Eric Wolford has been like on him. His dad has told me that he's like an ultimate closer, and he finds ways to communicate to them every day. Maybe he'll send a picture one day or a quote, but he's like constantly in communication. And so that, you know, Tyler Steen has a pretty good connection with Alabama. You know, I think he's going to shoot the weather. You know, if it's anything like it is today, is going to be really nice for him. So make for a nice visit. And you know, I think he'll get to see practice. So I think that it could be a really big weekend for Alabama.
It'd be huge. It'd be huge. Tony, thank you for coming on here so much, man, talking basketball, football, all of the sports at the University of Alabama right now, man. We appreciate your coverage and what you do for Bama Central, man.
Oh, yeah, man. Anytime. I love being on the podcast.
All right. For Tony Tsoukalas, I'm Tyler Martin. This has been another edition of the All Things Bama podcast. Thank you for watching and listening.